What's up everybody, Big Jano here. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the series Anycubic Mega X How-Tos. Today we're going to be focusing on slicer profiles and I'm going to be showing you guys how to set up your very first Cura slicer profile setting for the Anycubic Mega X. When I first got my 3D printer, I had no idea what a slicer software was, so I figured today would be a great day to show everyone how to set up a simple slicer in Cura to get your first 3D prints off this machine up and running with great success. Now I know there are a lot of different slicer softwares out there. Cura is not the only slicer you can use with the Anycubic Mega X. However, we're going to focus on Cura today just because Anycubic recommends using Cura out of the box. So that's what we're going to use today just to get up and running with the machine. And I'm going to show you guys how to do that right now. I do want to make one note before we begin, and that's to know that these settings aren't the end-all user settings with this software, with the slicer profile, and that these are the settings I usually use when I'm printing like 99% of what I'm printing on the daily. There are other settings in the software that you could use for different prints. There are a lot of experimental settings as well. However, if I'm printing something, these are what I recommend for when you set up your printer for the very first time and trying to get those first couple prints to be a great success. Alright. I think it's time to shrink me down so you can see what I'm doing. Alright, you guys should be able to see the bigger screen rather than my face. So you guys will be able to see what I'm doing firsthand so you guys can follow along if you're going to set this up while you're watching this video, or if you're going to go back and watch it later and then go back and set your profile up, you can do the same. So the first thing that's going to pop up is the add a printer box here. And there's going to be a section where you can add a networked printer or an unnetworked printer, a non-networked printer. And we're going to select the non-networked printer here. And then you're going to have a list of all these different printers here. And you're going to find the one, in this case, the Anycubic Mega X. Well, there's an Anycubic column, but there's not an Anycubic Mega X profile. But that's okay, because we can use the Anycubic i3 Mega as our base profile. And then we can go in and change the bed dimensions to fit the Mega X. So we're going to click Anycubic i3 Mega. And then we're going to call it whatever we want. So I'm going to call it Big Jano's Anycubic Mega X. Or Anycubic, or Mega X. We'll just call it Big Jano's Mega X. There we go. And we're going to click Next. So once we get everything installed, you're going to get to this screen. And this is going to be the home screen of Cura. You're going to see your printer profile that you have selected up above. And it's going to show the X, Y, and Z coordinate system in this enclosed space, if you want to call it that. The problem we have right now is that this X, Y, and Z space is incorrect because remember, we have the wrong sized bed set right now for the slicer. But we're going to go change that right now. If you see in the top left corner, there's a little folder icon. And then right to the right of that is the name you just named your printer. So we're going to click on Big Jano's Mega X or whatever you named your printer. We're going to click on that. And then we're going to go to Manage Printers on the right here. From there, we're going to stick into the printer settings. And then we're going to click this Machine Settings button that's on the right. We're going to click that. And now we're going to get to this screen here. And this is going to have all your machine settings that you're going to focus on. So right now we have our X, Y, and Z print bed dimensions right here. We're going to change these to match the Mega X. So instead of 210 for the X and Y, we're going to change these to 300 millimeters in both the X and the Y. And then we're also, for the Z height is also taller. It's about 305 millimeters. So we're going to type 305 for the Z height. Billet plate shape is going to be the same. It's going to be rectangular, so we're going to keep that the same. Origin at center is going to remain unchecked. We don't want our origin at the center because it's not at the center. It's at the far bottom left corner, or 000 in this case. It is a heated bed, so we're going to make sure the heated bed section is checkmark. Heated bed volume, I'm going to keep that unchecked because it's not as necessary. The next thing we have here is the G-code flavor. That's going to be Marlin. That's not going to change with this printer. If you have a different printer with a different G-code software, it might be different. You can see there are different selections here, but we're going to stick with Marlin because that's what's on this machine. Once we get the printer settings column taken care of on the left, we're now going to focus on the print head settings on the right-hand side. Now our X-min, Y-min, X-max, and Y-max coordinates are actually the same as what they're shown here. Your X min and Y min should be -20 and -10 millimeters respectively. So if that's already shown up in your profile, you don't have to change that. And then for your X max and Y max, they should both be at 10 millimeters. So if you don't see that, change it to 10 millimeters. But these numbers should already self-populate, so they shouldn't have to be changed. But if you do, then feel free to change those. And then you're going to see gantry height right below there. That should be at 0.0 millimeters. And then since this is a single extruder machine, we're going to have only one extruder on this machine. Simple. It's common sense, really. And then apply extruder offsets to G-code. We're going to keep that box check mark. That's just going to make sure that all these settings are adhered to the G-code. At this point now, we can take a look at our start G-code and end G-code boxes here on the bottom of the screen. And what's really nice about this slicer profile setup is that because the Mega S and the Mega X are really close and similar to the softwares they use, that these G-codes are going to be the exact same for both machines. So we're not going to have to change the start G-code or the end G-code in this instance. We're going to keep everything that's here the same. We're not going to modify anything. Just be sure to not accidentally click something in here and remove a semicolon or a comma. That can mess up the G-code and actually mess up your 3D prints big time. So make sure you don't do that. If you happen to do it by accident, just go back out of here, start over. But also make sure you have the right printer selected, as none of this will self-populate if you have the wrong printer. But that's one thing to note, that we don't have to change anything. So that's another great thing about this. It's very little setup for what we have to do to get you up and running in 3D printing. So now we're good with the printer settings on the Mega X, and now we're going to go over to the extruder settings on this, and they should be set to defaults already. The nozzle size should be 0.4 millimeters. That's what comes standard on the Anycubic Mega X. And unless you change the nozzle out to a different diameter at any point in time, they're always going to keep it at 0.4. You don't need to change it unless you change your nozzle. So we'll keep that at 0.4 for right now. And then the material diameter should be set at 1.75 millimeters because that's the material thickness that we can take in this machine. The nozzle offset in the X and Y should be at 0. And there's also a 0 next to the cooling fan number. That doesn't need to be applied here. And there's no G-code for the extruder itself, so we're good there. So now we can finally close out of the printer settings portion of this profile and move on to the actual print settings. So we'll click out of this, and we can click out of that. And now we'll go back to this main screen here. Now to the right of where we just clicked on Big Jano's Mega X, or your printer's name, there's a profile tab for specific materials. Now for this case, we're going to just keep it at generic PLA. But if you're using different materials, you can set up different profiles for different materials depending on what you're printing with. But for this video and all intents and purposes, PLA comes with the machine actually, and that's what a lot of people use when printing with this machine. So we're going to use PLA, and we're going to use the generic PLA profile. It should be fine. So we'll just keep it like that. We'll click on that again to hide it. And then we'll move over to the far right, and this will be our first generic profile that comes set default into Cura. This is the normal 0.2 millimeter profile. And if I click on this, it shows some very basic settings right now. You have a choice between 3 different profiles at the moment. You have a 0.1, 0.2, and 0.3, and those refer to the thickness of the material coming out of the nozzle. So either 0.2 layer heights, 0.1 layer height, which is for more detailed prints, or for 0.3 millimeters for less detailed prints, but for faster printing. You can also choose infill settings here from 0 to 100, as well as support and adhesion settings. And at the bottom of this tab, you're going to see there's a custom button here. We're going to click on that custom button, and we're basically going to tweak these settings and add some custom sets to highlight certain things that we're going to want to adjust every time we print. So we're going to go ahead and click that custom button right now. So you guys can see there's a ton of different tabs that you can make adjustments and tweaks to customize this profile. You have your overall quality, print quality settings. You have your wall thickness settings. You have your top and bottom wall settings. You have your infill. You have your material settings, your speed, your travel, your cooling, support, build plate adhesion, and your dual extrusion settings if you have a dual extruder. All these settings, except for the dual extrusion one, I don't really use that one for obvious reasons here. This is a single extruder printer. But every single one of these other settings we do or will modify and tweak in some way, shape, or form to have different settings be able to be modified for every print. And we'll go through each one of these categories one at a time. So we'll go to the quality one first, and you can see the only thing that we have right now is layer height, and that's set at default as 0.2 millimeters. Now, if we want to add any more additional settings in this category, there is a gear onto the side. If you click on the shaded gray bar, you can click on that gear and it will pull up a settings visibility box that has all these other individual settings that you can activate or deactivate for your profile in order to make adjustments to or to remove for your print if it's not necessary. So right now you see the layer height is checked. If I uncheck it, you can see on to the right, it goes away from the profile. We are actually going to select layer height again so it shows back up. And then we're going to click initial layer height as another feature I like to add to my profile. Because I like to do is sometimes I take the first initial layer and make it a certain thickness, and then the rest of the layers after that in the print, I make a different thickness. In this case, I usually like to do 0.2 layer height for my initial layer, and then I like to do 0.15 for my layers after that, so it gets really good adhesion to the bed and the print can go off and running great. So before I do that, I have to click close after I'm all done with this. We're going to be coming back to the screen a lot for the other settings, so just get used to this settings visibility box. I'm going to click close from now. And then for my layer height, unless I'm printing something with a ton of detail, I'll usually keep this at 0.2, but for the sake of us in this video, I'll change this to 0.15 just to make it a little bit different. So we have our initial layer height and our regular layer height in the quality tab. So now our next setting is the walls, and the top and bottom walls are also kind of relevant to the walls. So we're going to do both these at once. If I click on the walls tab and the top and bottom walls tab, you can see what's shown here below. We have our wall thickness, and then we also have our wall line count. I'm going to set the wall line count first before I do the wall thickness. Right now it's showing at 2 walls. I'm going to bump that up to 3. I think 3 is a good amount for making sure the print has enough sturdiness around the walls, and it's also not too thin, and it's not going to fail, or less likely to fail, I should say. But if you see the number, once you change the number here, the wall thickness number is actually going to calculate itself. Certain values will calculate themselves based on inputs you give into the custom profile settings. So that's something to keep in mind, especially with this one. I'll let you guys know when that's going to happen. In terms of horizontal expansion here in this category here, I'm going to leave that at 0.0. And now we'll move on to the top and bottom section. We'll go top and bottom thickness, and then you have your top thickness as well. You have your top layers, and then you have your bottom thickness and your bottom layers. Right now, we're going to adjust our top and bottom layers. And right now, these are set at 8. I'm going to change these also to 3 each. 3 on the top and 3 on the bottom. As you can see as well, these numbers for the bottom thickness and the top thickness also self-change themselves. They recalculated based on the wall count. Again, I think the walls, having 3 walls is just enough. I don't think it's too many. You can have more walls. It's not going to affect the huge quality of your print. It also depends on what you're printing. You might want to add more walls for support, structure, whatever. So that number can change. It depends on what you're printing to. I keep it at 3 because it's a nice medium, and it's not. It saves a little bit of time with 3D printing as well. So the next setting we have is our infill settings. And this one's actually pretty simple. If we click on the infill setting tab here, we have our infill density and our infill pattern. Here for infill density, I usually change it depending on what I'm printing. Certain times I do require a lot of density in my prints, so I'll print with really high infill. Somewhere between 75 and 80% at times. Other times I don't need a lot of infill, so I'll print maybe like 10 to 25%. For this, in all intensive purposes, if you're looking for something that's a good medium in terms of infill, I would recommend 20%, 15 to 20% infill. We'll go 20 here in this case. And then the infill pattern, you can choose whatever infill pattern you want. I usually go with grid because it usually takes less time to print with, and it's a simple pattern. It doesn't have to do a lot more travel than it needs to. So I'm going to click on grid. And that's pretty much our infill settings right there. Pretty simple. No other explanation necessary there. So now we're going to focus on the material tab in your Cura profile settings. So we're going to go to the material tab here and then click the gear again. And then we're going to scroll down to the material settings. It's usually under infill. And then we're going to start to notice there's only 2 boxes checked. There's printing temperature, and then there's build plate temperature. We're going to keep both those boxes checked. However, we're going to pick 2 more boxes to check off. We're going to click printing temperature initial layer. We're going to click on that one. And then we're also going to click on build plate temperature initial layer. I like setting the initial layer temperatures of both the build plate and the nozzle separate from the rest of the print, just to make sure the material sticks to the bed and everything adheres to that first layer so the rest of the print comes out great. So we're going to have all 4 of those boxes checked. I don't have anything else in the material settings checked off, so we're going to click close. Now we can open up the material tab and we should see 4 temperature settings. So for my printing temperature, for PLA, I like to keep it at 210 degrees Celsius. That's something that I usually never change unless the material is really finicky and I have to adjust it a few degrees. The initial layer temperature, I usually bump up to 215 degrees Celsius just to make sure, again, for adhesion issues and make sure the material is coming out of the nozzle pretty well. And then for build plate temperature, I like to keep it at 60 degrees Celsius throughout the entire print. That's a great temperature for adhesion for PLA, and I haven't had an issue with it since. So we're going to keep it at 60 degrees there, and then we should be good to go there. All right, so now we're going to focus on our speed settings. This, along with the travel settings in your slicer profile, are probably the 2 most important settings you're going to be focusing on today. So on the speed settings, the only box that you'll see checkmarked initially by default is print speed. We're going to keep that one checked, and then we're also going to check a few more boxes just to make sure we have different speeds for a couple crucial elements in your 3D printing. I like to pick infill speed, wall speed, which are the 2 right below print speed, and then I'm also going to select support speed as well as initial layer speed. Now you can play around with these settings a little bit. These don't have to be the exact settings you use. You can play with the travel speed of your nozzle. You can adjust the speed of how fast your nozzle moves across the bed. However, these 5 boxes checked are what I usually use when I set 99% of my prints, and it can get you up and running pretty quick as well. So these are what we're going to be using today. I'm going to click close on that, and then we can adjust our settings off to the right here. We're going to check on the speed box, and you can see they're all set to default at 50 millimeters per second. This is where we're going to set some numbers up that, again, you can play around with these numbers a little bit, but this is what I use to set the standard. So let's take a look at these speed settings in detail. We're going to start off with the generic print speed settings. Now this can affect other settings in your slicer, and if you didn't check mark the other boxes in detail, this usually applies to anything that we didn't select and aren't going to modify manually. So it's set at default at 50 millimeters per second. I'd like to keep it around 50 millimeters per second, but I don't recommend going any higher than 50 millimeters per second. I found that anything over 50 millimeters per second in speed on any setting causes the quality of the prints to go down dramatically on this machine. So 50 millimeters per second is a good generic starting speed. Depending on what you're printing, you might have to go lower. You might have to go down to 35, 40. But for now, let's keep this at 50 millimeters per second because I think this is going to be a good setup for most people starting out the gate. Infill speed is going to be the same way. We're going to want it to be a little bit faster. We don't want to waste too much time on printing the infill if we're going to be printing in our case, a generic infill pattern. So we're going to keep this actually at 45 millimeters per second. Now you could go between 40 and 45. That's what I usually like to go to. I don't usually make it the same speed as the overall print speed, but still fast enough that's not going to take too much time away from the rest of the print. Wall speed is going to be the same way. We want the walls to be printed pretty quickly, but we do want to make sure that we print the walls well on our prints. We don't want the walls to deform or warp. So we are going to keep this, I might do this at 45 as well. I don't want to do it at 50, but 45 should still be a good solid medium there. Support speed is going to be a little bit different. We want the supports to print really well on your print, or else you're going to have failed supports, and then you're also going to have a failed print. So for support speed, I like to go a lot slower than the regular speeds or the infill or wall speeds. So in this case, I'm going to set my support speed here to be about 30 millimeters per second. I really want to make sure those supports print well so the rest of the print comes out great. And then our initial layer speed, I also want to make sure it's a little bit slower so that that first layer adheres really well to the print, and that way we have less chance of failure early on. So we're also going to set this, I'm going to set this at 40 millimeters per second. Because it's not too fast, but it's also not super slow. It's going to not take forever for your first layer to get done. And now onto our travel settings for our slicer profile. You should already see that there's 2 checkmark boxes already when you go into the settings visibilities. You should see enabled retraction and Z-hop when retracted. These 2 boxes are never going to be unchecked, as these are always going to be checked when you're setting your retraction settings. These also should be set by default. So if they're not already set, checkmark these 2 boxes now. We're also going to checkmark 2 more boxes here. We're also going to select retraction distance and retraction speed. Those 2 are going to help us set our retraction settings for our slicer every time we go to print something. Once we do that, we can click close out of here, and then we can set our settings right from here. For me, I found a really healthy medium of 5 millimeters and 35 millimeters per second to be a great retraction settings for the Anycubic Mega X. I've had to play around with this a little bit as I've printed stuff over the last year or so, and I found that this is a good medium for retraction settings with this machine. Now you can adjust this setting depending on what you're printing. You might have to tweak the numbers slightly. Again, I do not recommend going anything faster than 50 millimeters per second here on the speed, or else you could cause your nozzle to clog and you can cause some issues down the road. So please don't go anything faster than 50 millimeters per second. I've done it firsthand experience. It's not fun with this machine, but this is the healthy medium I found for 99% of my prints. That's worked really well. And if you have to make any little tweaks or adjustments, you can. Now you can adjust these settings depending on what you're printing. If you're printing something that's a little bit more detail or something that's going to be a lot less volume, you might have to tweak your settings depending on what you're printing and how fast you're printing it. But that's kind of trial and error. You have to kind of get used to how your machine runs before you can really get that dialed in. In terms of cooling settings, we already have this set up through our default slicer profile. If you click on the cooling tab and expand it, you should see enable print cooling already check mark on. That should never come off unless you're printing with a material that you don't really need cooling. But for PLA, I always keep a check mark because we're always going to be trying to cool the print down as it goes. And then for fan speed, I usually always keep it at 100%. And now we've reached the support settings of our slicer profile. Now, after many months of trial and error, I finally got these support settings to be just right with this machine in terms of where the supports are really sturdy throughout the print, but they're also very easy to pull off after the print is over. So if we open up the settings visibility tab in the support section, we're going to see two boxes checkmarked at the very top, generate support and support extruder. We're going to keep those checkmarked. They should already be selected by default. And we're going to keep scrolling down until we see two more checkboxes under support placement and support overhang angle. These are also supposed to be checkmarked by default. And then there's going to be one right below that that says support pattern. We're going to select support pattern here because we're going to be able to select the pattern and the density of our supports, so that way we can set how thick and how dense these supports are when we go to print them. And depending on what pattern and density we make, we could save some time by printing by making them less dense and not a crazy support pattern. So we want the support pattern to be checked off here. We're going to keep scrolling down, and then we're going to see support density like we just mentioned. We're going to check mark that box there, and then right below it you're going to see a support line distance box. We're going to check mark that as well because we're going to set the distance from the support, the top of the support, to the underside of the print, and that gap is going to be the difference between the support fusing onto the material of the print versus that little bit of gap that we're going to be able to pull off the support without damaging the print. We're going to keep scrolling down here. We're going to go to an enable support roof. Now this is going to help with the supports as well. It's going to give a roof to the last layer of the support, so it's again easier to pull off once the support's all set and printed. So we're going to go to enable support roof, and then that should be the last setting on the supports tab. So we're going to click close, and then that should be all set up over here. Now, if you're going to be printing support on your materials, you're going to click the generate support box before you go and slice your print. Support placement, you can choose between touching everywhere or touching build plate and everywhere. In this case, it all depends on what you're printing. If you need it everywhere, then you're going to select everywhere. But if you only need it on sections where it's touching the build plate, then you're going to select touching build plate. Simple as that. So for now, we're just going to click everywhere. Another setting I like to choose in my slicer profile here is the support Z distance. And that's also going to help with the support density and the line distance we just mentioned earlier. And that's going to help with the spacing of the support between the support and the model, so that way we can pull the support off with little issue. So we're going to check mark that as well, and we're going to click close. So now that we have all our support settings, if you click on the drop down tab here on the right, you should see all the new settings we just selected. If you don't want to print supports on your print, all you have to do is uncheck this generate support box and all the settings magically go away. If you do want supports, recheck the box and they show up again. In terms of support placement, you have two options. You have everywhere and touching the build plate, and that just depends on your model and how you want to print this. It all depends on what you're printing, so that could change no matter what print you have, but those are your two options there. In terms of support overhang angle, this is the angle that the slicer is going to automatically give supports to if your model has anything that has an angle of that or higher. So in my case, I like to set the support overhang angle to 55 degrees. That's a nice medium, so it's not drastic angle, but it's also not a 45-degree angle, because most 3D printers can print at 45-degree angle in most cases. So 55 degrees is a good place to have that. And then in terms of support pattern, I like to go the zigzag option. However, you can choose whatever you want here. This is more of a personal preference, similar to how we have the infill pattern when we were selecting our infill settings earlier. In terms of support density, I also like to keep this on the lower end because we don't want to spend too much time on the supports printing them, but we also want to be able to pull them off still and not make them too sturdy or dense that they almost fuse to the model, because we've had that happen before and it's not fun. So I like to keep this at 15%. In terms of support line distance right below it, this number should be automatically generated based on the setting numbers we put above. I'm going to keep this at 2.6667 because this is what's worked for me pretty well. And then on our support Z distance, it should show up at 0.1 millimeters as default. I'm going to change this to 0.4 millimeters. I found this number to be a good, solid number to have enough gap in the support between the model so I can pull off the support without it fusing to the model. This is a great 0.4 is what I usually go with here. And then the enable support roof, I'm going to keep that check mark as well. Now in terms of your build plate adhesion, we're not going to have to change anything here by default. You should already have a drop down menu of a skirt, brim, a raft, or have nothing at all. And depending on what you're printing, you could have any of these in your print. If you're printing with something with less surface area, I recommend printing a raft just because you'll have enough contact area so there's no failures on your first layer. However, most prints will require a skirt, be it sufficient enough. You could print a brim as well, but just remember that the brim attaches itself to the model and you will have to cut it off or shave it off with a pair of shears or a sharp edge. Now, one other setting I like to have in my Cura profile on occasion is vase mode. Now, they don't call it vase mode in Cura. It's a special setting in Cura called Spiralize Outer Contours, and it's in the Experimental tab. So what we're going to do, we're going to click on the gear again and open up the Settings Visibility tab. And now there is a Advanced tab or an Experimental tab here in Cura. If you go all the way down to the bottom, you should see the Experimental group of settings. However, you can just search for this in the Search tab. You're going to type in Spiralize Outer Contour. If you type the first couple letters, it should pop up. It's this first thing up here. If you ever want to print something in vase mode, you want this setting selected. So we're going to click on that and click Close. Now, if you go back to the top, the slicer profile on the right hand side, you should see special modes in the bottom tab here, and Spiralize Outer Contour is a setting that you can check and uncheck if you want to print any of your 3D prints in vase mode. And that's something cool to have, just to have. It's optional, you don't have to have it, but I also recommend you guys check out some of the other experimental settings if you're curious on what your slicer settings can do for you. And now that we have our slicer profile squared away, we can now slice a model and get it ready for the 3D printer. And there you have it, guys. That's how you set up the Cura profile for your Anycubic Mega X. I hope you guys learned a thing or two today, and I hope this really helps you guys get your printer out of the box and up and running as quick as possible without many issues whatsoever. I hope you guys get great prints out of this, and if you find any setting issues that you're seeing struggles with, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about them and see how we can improve things. Also, let me know in the comments below, guys, if there's any other settings in Cura that you should highly recommend me enabling in my profile to add on to the slicer settings to make my prints even better. As a reminder, everybody, I am also a variety streamer on Twitch. I hang out there a few nights a week working on different projects, 3D printing things, and even gaming from time to time. So if you guys are on Twitch, feel free to give me a follow. Big Jano is where you can follow me there and come hang out with me there. Let's have a great time. You won't be disappointed, trust me. You can also follow me at Big Jano on Twitter. I let you guys know on Twitter a lot when I go live on Twitch, as well as when I drop new YouTube content, and let you guys know of other fun things that I'm working on in the process. So if you guys aren't following me on Twitter, you guys can go follow me there as well. I also forgot to mention as well, guys, if you haven't watched the first few videos of the Anycubic Mega X how-to series, I highly recommend you do so. Links are up above in the video here. Go check out those videos, go take a look. There might be something you haven't seen before or a new trick or tip that you might not know about. So go watch those videos, guys, if you haven't already. It would be greatly, greatly appreciated. With that being said, guys, that's going to do it for me for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I greatly appreciate every single one of you guys, now and always. I'll catch you guys in the next video. And until next time, keep doing it big. Take care, guys.